Here's another argument against the divine command theory, this time from the famous ancient philosopher Plato in his dialogue, the Euthyphro. And this argument takes the form of a destructive dilemma. It's either this or that, and either way it's bad. You're going to be impaled on the horn of the dilemma. So this is a way of arguing against a theory. Either right actions are right because they are commanded, or actions are commanded because they are already right. So suppose the divine command theorist says that right actions are right because they are commanded. This is strange. There's two objections to this. One objection is that it would seem that it's arbitrary what God commands and forbids. I mean, why did God forbid adultery and command telling the truth? Why did God forbid envying or coveting your neighbor's possessions? And why did he forbid worshiping other gods? It can't be because there's something inherently right or wrong about any of these actions. He just picked, I guess. What did he flip a coin? This is strange. How could it be so arbitrary? How could there be no moral reason for what God has chosen to command and forbid? Because they're right just because commanded, and wrong just because forbidden. That's one objection. Another objection is we can't, on this theory, understand divine goodness. So if God is good, then that means God always does what's right, and that God never does what's wrong. Now suppose that right actions are right just because they're commanded, and wrong actions are wrong just because they're forbidden. So now to be good means that you always do what's right. So to be good means that you always do what you command. What? That's not coherent. That's not what it is to be good. It's just not right, it seems, to say that to be perfectly good is to always do what you command and to never do what you forbid. Suppose that you're Hitler, but you're very consistent, and you always do the kind of things that you command others, and you never do the kind of things that you forbid. Well, that's not going to make you good. So that seems to be a pretty bad problem for the theist who wants to accept the divine command theory and accepts the first horn of the dilemma and says that right actions are right just because they're commanded. What if you go the other way and say the reverse, that actions are commanded because they're already right? So God forbids adultery because that's already wrong. God commands telling the truth because that's always right. God commands you to have mercy and compassion on the poor because that's already right. Well, okay, that gets rid of the arbitrary problem, but it seems that to accept the second horn is just to give up on the divine command theory. I mean, then you're no longer holding the idea that rightness just is being commanded and wrongness just is being forbidden. You're saying that there's some other moral standard by which to judge actions independently of what God commands and forbids. So that seems a pretty hard problem to get around. And as I already mentioned, divine command theory has not been popular. It doesn't follow, though, if the divine command theory is false, that God's commands would be irrelevant to the moral status of actions. It may be that some actions are wrong just because they're forbidden by God. For instance, if the Jewish Bible is correct, then It's wrong, at least for Jews, to work on the Sabbath day, on Saturday, and it's wrong to eat pork. The idea is that those actions are not intrinsically wrong. But they're still wrong, nonetheless, just because they've been forbidden. You don't have to be a divine command theorist to think that God has the authority to issue commands which are then binding on us. Now, God couldn't take an action like torturing innocent babies merely for the fun of it and make that right. He can't change necessary truths because it's impossible that a necessary truth be false. It's contradictory. But he could take an action which in itself is neither intrinsically right nor intrinsically wrong and make it right or wrong, arguably. A couple more points. If we can know God's will, even though divine command theory is false, it would be a reliable guide to what is right and wrong. Look, God's supposed to be all-knowing. He knows everything, and he's supposed to be perfectly good, so presumably whatever he wants would be a reliable guide to what's good, to what's right. So the kind of things he wants would be right, and the kind of things he doesn't want would be wrong. That's going to be true even if, say, John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism is true and God exists. That would be true even if Kant is correct and God exists. But again, it seems that not all right and wrong actions could be that way. That is, right or wrong solely because they're commanded or forbidden. Now, the traditional response to the Euthyphro discussion and divine command theory and its difficulties is that there is a standard of right and wrong which isn't controlled by God, which is namely the natures of things. So the idea is, why is it wrong to commit adultery, or why is it wrong to kill? It's wrong just because the world is the way it is. There's something about the natural order which implies that those things are wrong. Remember, Aristotle said that every natural unity, like a person or a tree, has at least one natural function, something that it only does or it best does. He thought that natural things have a function or a purpose, and he didn't particularly think of that in terms of God's will. But the later school of Greek philosophers, called the Stoics, they did think of natural purposes and functions in terms of God's will, and of course Christian philosophers do as well, and always did. So they all agree that there are natural purposes and functions. All three of them agree on that, but the Stoics and Christians hold that these are determined by a design plan. By God's plan. So the idea is that there's a law of nature, that just the way that things are put together reflects a certain plan by God, and that certain actions go against that plan. Those are unnatural. And that other actions are natural, they're in accordance with that design plan. And the theory is that it's natural acts that are right and unnatural acts that are wrong. So that's natural law theory. And this has been pretty popular among philosophers who believe in God, Jews and Christians and Muslims. And it too gives an objective grounding for right and wrong. and it has to do with God, but it doesn't have to do with just God's commands. It has to do with the whole natural order. So what does the theory say? It says natural acts are right, unnatural acts are wrong. Natural acts are acts specified by the design plan and or in accordance with a thing's natural function or role. Unnatural acts are acts ruled out by the design plan and or against or destructive of a thing's natural function or role. So let's consider just a couple of examples to see how this is supposed to work. We think that stealing is wrong. On this theory, stealing is wrong because it's unnatural. We've been designed by God to respect one another's property and not take it without permission. That's reasonable and right, and when we steal, we're going against that plan. Or how about this? It's right to take care of your own children, to feed and clothe and protect them, teach them and guide them and so on. The idea is, well, this is part of the design plan. Parents are supposed to take care of their own children. That is in accordance with things' natural function and role, which is living a distinctively human life. What about neglectful parents that don't feed and clothe their children? The idea is, well, that's unnatural, and that's against the design plan, and it's destructive of human life. How about keeping your promises? I say, well, it's natural to keep your promises. That's just fitting. That's how we're made to interact with one another and constantly trust one another. If you go around lying or breaking your promises, that's destructive of the natural order. It breaks the social fabric, as it were. It's just against the design plan, and that's what it is for it to be wrong. Now, this theory is interesting, and it's been held plausible by many people. It's very unpopular nowadays. One of its problem is that it's about as unclear as divine command theory is clear. Because, it's somewhat unclear what's going to count as natural and unnatural. And then when we define what natural and unnatural mean, we have to worry about this design plan or the concept of a natural function or role. And you might worry that these are unclear and that these aren't going to give us clear-cut answers to a lot of moral questions that we might ask. This theory doesn't obviously require theism. If there are purposes or functions in nature, but those are just naturally occurring and not from any designer, then maybe this could fly without monotheism being true. But most people think that natural law theory really does require belief in God. And certainly that's the easiest way to understand this concept of a design plan, just in terms of God's intentions. So take some actions that you think are obviously right or obviously wrong, and see if you find this theory plausible in what it says about those actions.